The scream of tires on wet pavement was the only warning Jessa Graves got before the black sedan slammed into the lamppost 3 feet from where she stood, and when the driver's door opened, the man who stepped out had skin like moonlight and hair the color of fresh snow. She should have run. Every instinct screamed at her to move, but her legs had turned to stone as she watched him straighten to his full height, easily over 6 feet, his movements liquid and precise despite the violence of the crash. The streetlight above flickered, casting shadows across features too perfect to be human sharp cheekbones, a mouth carved with cruel beauty, and eyes that burned like molten silver in the darkness. "You're bleeding," Jessa heard herself say, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Her nursing training kicked in automatically, overriding her fear as she noticed the dark stain spreading across his white shirt. The man's gaze snapped to her face and she felt the impact of it like a physical blow. For a moment something dangerous flickered in those silver eyes, something that made her heart stutter in her chest. Then his expression smoothed into aristocratic indifference. "How unfortunate that there are witnesses," he said, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't place, old, refined, dripping with authority. He took a step toward her, and Jessa finally found the sense to back away. I'm calling an ambulance," she said, fumbling for her phone with shaking hands. "You need medical attention. That crash, no hospitals." The command in his voice froze her fingers on the screen. "No authorities, you will forget you saw this." Jessa's spine stiffened despite her fear. She'd spent too many years being told what to do by men who thought their voices alone could command obedience. "You could have a concussion, internal bleeding." "You need." The rest of her words died as he moved, crossing the distance between them faster than her eyes could track. One moment he was by the wrecked car, the next he stood inches away, so close she could see that his skin truly was alabaster white, flawless and cold-looking. No breath disturbed the space between them. "What are you?" The question escaped as barely a whisper. A smile curved his lips, beautiful and terrible. "Something you should fear, little human." Before she could process those words, headlights cut through the darkness. A sleek black limousine glided to a stop beside them and 3 figures emerged. They shared the same unnatural coloring white skin, hair ranging from platinum to silver, and moved with that same predatory grace. "My Lord Lysander," one of them said, a woman whose beauty was so sharp it hurt to look at her directly. "The Moroi are pursuing. We must return to the court immediately." Lysander. The name sent a chill down Jessa's spine even as she tried to memorize every detail, the journalist in her awakening despite her terror. These people, these things weren't human. The way they moved, the way they looked, the old-fashioned formality in their speech. Vampires. She breathed, the woman's head whipped toward her with inhuman speed. "She knows. She must be dealt with." "No." Lysander's hand shot out, gripping Jessa's wrist with fingers that felt like ice through her jacket. "She comes with us." "My lord, the risk is mine to take." Serafina. His voice carried absolute authority, the kind that had been honed over centuries of command. "The Moroi saw me with her. If we leave her, they'll use her to send a message. I won't have innocent blood spilled because of our politics." Jessa tried to wrench her arm free, panic finally overriding everything else. "Let me go. I won't tell anyone, I swear. Just too late for that." Lysander's grip didn't hurt, but it was inescapable. "You've already been marked by association. The only way to keep you alive now is to bring you under my protection." "I don't need your protection. I don't even know you." His silver eyes met hers, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch, not cruelty, but a weary kind of resignation. "I am Lysander Draven, High King of the Noctis Court, and as of this moment you are under my personal safeguard, which means, I'm afraid, that you're coming home with me whether you wish it or not." Before she could protest further, he lifted her, actually lifted her like she weighed nothing, and deposited her in the back of the limousine. She scrambled for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Lysander slid in beside her, his presence dominating the enclosed space. "Drive," he commanded. "Take us through the eastern gate, and send word ahead that I'm bringing a guest." The car moved so smoothly Jessa barely felt it, but she was too busy trying to process what was happening to care. Vampires. Real, actual vampires. And their king had just kidnapped her off a street corner because she'd witnessed a car crash. "This is insane," she said, pressing herself against the opposite door. "You can't just abduct people." "I just did." Lysander was examining his injury, peeling back the blood-soaked shirt to reveal a wound that was already visibly healing. "And I saved your life in the process. The Moroi faction would have torn you apart simply for being near me. They're trying to start a war and any excuse will do. Why were they chasing you?" He glanced at her, one pale eyebrow rising. "Most humans in your position would be screaming or fainting. You're asking questions." "I'm a journalist," Jessa said, then immediately regretted it. Or I was, before, it doesn't matter. And I don't faint, a journalist. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his expression. How wonderfully inconvenient. He leaned back against the leather seat, his white hair catching the passing streetlights. The Moroi believe I'm too sympathetic to humans. They want to return to the old ways, hunting freely, ruling from the shadows, treating your kind as nothing more than cattle. I prefer the current arrangement where we coexist in secret, coexist. Jessa's laugh was slightly hysterical. You mean you hide while you feed on us? We have blood banks, donated supplies, and willing donors who are well compensated and protected. No one has to die. His voice was cold. The Moroi think that makes me weak. Tonight they tried to prove it by forcing a confrontation in the human world, hoping I'd slip, reveal us, break our most sacred law. The car turned sharply, and Jessa felt a strange tingling sensation wash over her skin, like she'd passed through an invisible barrier. The city lights disappeared, replaced by darkness, and then gradually, a different kind of illumination, soft, golden, coming from sources she couldn't identify. She pressed her face to the window and her breath stopped. They were driving through what looked like a palace courtyard, all Gothic spires and elegant architecture, but it was underground. Above them she could see rock instead of sky, vast caverns that had been transformed into something out of a dark fairy tale. Buildings of white stone and black iron stretched in every direction, connected by bridges and walkways, all of it lit by that sourceless golden glow. "Welcome to the Noctis Court," Lysander said quietly. "The realm beneath the city." The limousine stopped before an enormous set of doors, and when they opened, Jessa saw what had to be hundreds of vampires assembled in the courtyard. All of them had that same ethereal coloring, that same predatory beauty, and every single one of them was staring at the car. "Stay close to me," Lysander murmured as he exited. "Don't speak unless spoken to, and for both our sakes try not to look terrified." Jessa climbed out on shaking legs, very aware that she was the only human in sight, the only person with color in her cheeks and warmth in her skin. The assembled vampires watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hunger. Lysander's hand settled on the small of her back, the touch possessive and protective at once. He guided her forward, and the crowd parted before them like water. They walked through doors that were 20 feet high, into a throne room that took Jessa's breath away, all soaring ceilings and elegant columns, tapestries that looked centuries old, and at the far end, a throne of black stone and silver. But they didn't make it that far. An older vampire stepped forward, his white hair bound back with silver chains, his face lined with age despite his immortal nature. He bowed slightly to Lysander, then his eyes fixed on Jessa with open shock. "My lord," he said carefully, "you bring a human to court. May we know the reason?" "She was caught in the Moroi's attack," Lysander replied, his voice carrying through the vast space. "They saw her with me. Leaving her in the human world would have been a death sentence." Murmurs rippled through the assembled vampires. Jessa felt dozens of eyes on her, assessing, calculating. Her heart hammered so hard she was sure they could all hear it. Then someone near the front dropped to one knee. "Our queen," he said reverently. Jessa's mind went blank. "What?" But it was too late. Like a wave, the entire court was kneeling, heads bowed, and Jessa heard the words repeated in whispers: "The king's mate, his chosen, our queen." She whipped around to stare at Lysander, expecting him to correct them, to explain the mistake. But he was looking at the assembled court with that same aristocratic calm, not saying a word. "Tell them," Jessa hissed. "Tell them I'm not whatever they think I am." Lysander's hand tightened fractionally on her back. "Later," he murmured. "Just breathe." The older vampire who'd spoken first rose, his expression carefully neutral. "This is unexpected, my lord. A human queen has historical precedent." Lysander cut him off smoothly. "And is not up for discussion, Castellan." His silver eyes swept the room. "My mate is under my protection. Anyone who wishes to contest this may speak now." Silence. The kind of silence that hummed with tension and unspoken thoughts. "Excellent." Lysander's voice was edged with iron. "Then you may all return to your duties. Serafina, see that chambers are prepared. Castellan, convene the council at moonfall. We have much to discuss regarding the Moroi's actions tonight." The crowd dispersed, though Jessa could feel their eyes following her as Lysander guided her through a series of corridors, each more opulent than the last. Her mind was spinning, trying to piece together what had just happened and why he'd let them believe such an obvious lie. Finally, he opened a door and ushered her into a suite that was larger than her entire apartment. The furniture was antique, beautiful, the bed draped in silk that probably cost more than she made in a year. The moment the door closed behind them, Jessa rounded on him. "What the hell was that? Why didn't you correct them?" Lysander moved to a cabinet, pouring amber liquid into a crystal glass. Because the moment they assumed you were my mate, you became untouchable. No vampire in this court would dare harm the king's chosen. It's the only way to guarantee your safety while you're here. While Jessa's voice rose. I'm not staying here. This is kidnapping. I have a life, a job, an apartment, all of which will still be there when it's safe for you to return. He took a slow sip of his drink, watching her over the rim. The Moroi saw you, Miss Graves. They'll be watching your home, your workplace, everywhere you frequent. If you go back now, you'll be dead within a day. Then call the police. There are laws, human laws don't apply here. His voice was gentle but firm. You're in our world now, our rules. And in this world, the only thing keeping you alive is the belief that you're mine. Jessa sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs giving out. This can't be real. Vampires aren't real. This is all some kind of elaborate, you know it's real. Lysander set down his glass and crossed to stand before her. Up close, she could see the faint tracery of veins beneath his pale skin, the way his chest didn't rise and fall with breath. You felt it the moment you saw me, the wrongness, the danger. Your instincts were screaming truth at you. He was right, she had known on some deep primal level that he wasn't human, that none of them were. How long, she asked, her voice barely audible. How long do I have to stay? Until I've dealt with the Moroi threat. A few weeks, perhaps a month. He tilted his head, studying her. I know this isn't what you wanted, but I swear to you on my honor as king that I will protect you. No harm will come to you within these walls. Jessa wanted to scream, to cry, to demand he let her go, but she could see the truth in his strange silver eyes. This wasn't cruelty or some sick game. He genuinely believed this was the only way to keep her alive. I need to call my boss, she said finally. My family. They'll worry if I just disappear. Tomorrow, I'll have a phone brought to you. You can tell them you're taking an extended vacation. Lysander moved toward the door. For tonight, rest. You're safe here, I promise. Wait. The word left her before she could think better of it. Why did you crash? What were you running from? Something dark crossed his face. An assassination attempt. The Moroi tried to run me off the road, force me into sunlight. He touched the place where his wound had been, now healed completely. They failed, obviously, but they're getting bolder, which means I need to act soon, before this escalates into open war. He left before she could ask anything else, and Jessa heard the soft click of a lock engaging. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, in a world that shouldn't exist, playing a role she'd never auditioned for. She should have been terrified, and part of her was. But another part, the part that had always chased stories, that had never been able to leave a mystery alone, was already cataloging details, asking questions, trying to understand. Lysander Draven, Vampire King. And for reasons she didn't fully understand yet, the only thing standing between her and death. Sleep, when it finally came, was restless and full of silver eyes. When Jessa woke, sunlight was filtering through. She sat up sharply, then realized it wasn't sunlight at all, but some kind of artificial illumination designed to mimic dawn. The chamber had no windows, just walls of stone and tapestries depicting battles between beautiful pale figures. A soft knock at the door preceded Serafina's entrance. The female vampire from last night carried a tray laden with food, actual human food. Jessa noted with relief and regarded her with those unsettling crimson eyes. The king requests your presence at breakfast, Serafina said, setting the tray on a nearby table. But he thought you might prefer to eat first, alone. That's considerate. Jessa eyed the food warily. It's not poisoned, is it? The vampire's lips twitched. If we wanted you dead, there are far more efficient methods. The king values you. We would not betray his wishes. Jessa picked up a piece of toast, studying Serafina. Do you all really think I'm his mate, or is this some political game I don't understand? Serafina was quiet for a long moment. The king has ruled alone for 300 years. Never once in all that time has he brought someone into the court and claimed them as his. So yes, we believe it, because to lie about such a thing would be. She paused, searching for words. It would be sacrilege. A mating bond is sacred among our kind. But we're not bonded, we just met, perhaps. Serafina's gaze was knowing. Or perhaps the king sees something the rest of us do not. He is ancient, powerful, and very, very careful about whom he allows close. The fact that he chose to save you, to bring you here, to claim you before the entire court. She shrugged elegantly. That speaks volumes. After Serafina left, Jessa found clothes laid out for her, expensive, beautiful things in deep jewel tones. She chose a simple dress in emerald green, refusing to think about how perfectly it fit, and made her way out into the corridor. A guard, another white-haired vampire, straightened at her appearance. My lady, I'm to escort you to the king's chambers. My lady. The title made her skin prickle, but she followed him through the winding halls, trying to memorize the route. The court was even more impressive in the artificial daylight, all Gothic grandeur and ancient beauty. They passed other vampires, all of whom bowed their heads respectfully when they saw her. The guards stopped before an ornate door. "The king is expecting you." Jessa knocked, and Lysander's voice called for her to enter. His chambers were darker than hers, lit by candles despite the artificial daylight outside. Lysander stood by a massive desk covered in papers and maps, and for the first time Jessa saw him in full formal dress, black and silver, with a collar that suggested royalty. His white hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp beauty of his face. "Miss Graves." He gestured to a chair. "Please sit, we have much to discuss." She sat, keeping her spine straight. "Like the part where you told your entire court I'm your mate." "I didn't tell them anything. They assumed." He poured her tea from an elegant pot, the civilized gesture at odds with his predatory nature. "But yes, we should discuss that." "There's nothing to discuss. You'll tell them the truth, and then you'll be dead within the week." Lysander's voice was flat. "The moment I reveal you're not my mate, your protection evaporates. There are factions within this court that would use you to undermine me. Others who simply hate humans on principle. As my mate, you're sacred. As a random human I happen to save," he shook his head, "you become a liability. A weakness to exploit." Jessa's hands tightened on the teacup. "So I'm supposed to just pretend? For how long? Until the Moroi are dealt with and I can safely return you to your world." He leaned back against the desk, his silver eyes intent on her face. "I know it's an impossible situation, but I'm asking you to trust me, play the role. Let the court believe we're bonded. In return, I'll give you everything you need: safety, comfort, answers to any questions you have about our world." "I could write a hell of a story with those answers," Jessa said before she could stop herself. Lysander's smile was brief but genuine. "You could, but you won't." "Why not?" "Because despite your anger and fear, you're not cruel, and exposing our existence would lead to war, human and vampire both suffering." He tilted his head. "Am I wrong?" Jessa wanted to argue, but she couldn't. He was right. Whatever else she felt, she couldn't be responsible for that kind of bloodshed. "No," she admitted quietly. "You're not wrong. Then we have an accord." He pushed away from the desk. "Now let me show you the court properly. If you're to be my queen, you should understand the kingdom you've inherited." The tour took hours. Lysander showed her the great halls where the court assembled, the libraries that held books dating back millennia, the training grounds where young vampires learned to fight. He explained their society, the careful hierarchy, the laws that governed them, the delicate balance they maintained with the human world above. "We're not monsters," he said as they walked through a garden filled with night-blooming flowers. "Not all of us, at least. Most vampires want the same things humans do: safety, purpose, connection. We just happen to need blood to survive." "And you never kill?" Jessa asked, watching him carefully. "Not anymore, not in my court. I outlawed hunting humans 200 years ago." His voice hardened. "Those who break that law face execution. The Moroi hate me for it. They believe we should embrace our nature, take what we need without apology. But you don't agree." "I believe power comes with responsibility. I'm old enough to remember when we did hunt freely, when humans were prey and we were predators. It led to nothing but death and fear on both sides." He paused beside a fountain, his reflection ghostly in the water. "I've lived too long to keep making the same mistakes." Jessa found herself studying him, really looking at him for the first time. Beyond the inhuman beauty, she saw weariness in the set of his shoulders, a kind of bone-deep exhaustion that spoke of centuries carrying the weight of his crown. "How old are you?" she asked softly. 847. He said it casually, like it was nothing. "I was turned during the Crusades, became king 300 years ago when the previous ruler was destroyed. It's been a long time." 800 years. Jessa's mind struggled to comprehend it. "Don't you get lonely?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Too personal, too intimate. But Lysander didn't seem offended. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally, "more than you could possibly imagine." Something in his voice made her chest ache. Before she could examine that feeling too closely, a vampire appeared at the end of the garden path, the castellan from the night before. "My lord, the council is assembled." Lysander's expression shifted, becoming remote and regal once more. "I'll be there shortly." He turned to Jessa. "I'm afraid I have duties to attend to. Serafina will escort you back to your chambers. Can I come?" The words tumbled out before Jessa could think better of them. "To the council meeting, I mean. If I'm supposed to be your mate, shouldn't I understand what you're dealing with?" The castellan looked scandalized, but Lysander's eyes gleamed with something that might have been approval. "Very well, but you observe only. Don't speak unless I indicate you may." The council chamber was a circular room with a round table at its center, and seated around it were 12 of the most intimidating vampires Jessa had seen yet. They all rose when Lysander entered, and several cast sharp glances at Jessa when she followed. My lords and ladies, Lysander said, taking his seat at the head of the table. You all know why we're here. The Moroi attempted to assassinate me last night. This cannot stand. A male vampire with scars across his pale face leaned forward. They grow bold, my king. 3 attacks in as many months. We must respond with force. Force will give them exactly what they want, a war that divides the court. Lysander's fingers drummed on the table. We need to be smarter than that, perhaps, a female vampire said delicately. If the king had taken a mate sooner, shown the court stability, the Moroi would not have seen weakness to exploit. Jessa felt every eye turned to her. She kept her face carefully neutral, the way she'd learned to do during hostile interviews. Lady Moira raises an interesting point, another vampire said. The king's new mate is human. Surely that will only embolden those who oppose your policies, or it will prove, Lysander said quietly, that the bond between human and vampire is not only possible but powerful, that the future I envision for our people, one of coexistence rather than domination, is achievable. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Then the scarred vampire laughed, a sharp sound. You always were an idealist, Lysander. Very well, what do you propose? They spent the next 2 hours discussing strategy, identifying Moroi sympathizers, strengthening alliances with neutral factions, reaching out to other vampire courts for support. Jessa listened, fascinated despite herself by the complexity of vampire politics. When the meeting finally ended, Lysander touched her elbow gently. You did well. Most humans would have fled screaming. I'm not most humans, she paused. And for what it's worth, I think you're right. About coexistence, I mean. His smile was small but genuine. That means more than you know. Over the following days, Jessa fell into a strange routine. Mornings were spent with Lysander, learning about the court and his duties. Afternoons, she was given freedom to explore the underground realm, always with guards, but still. Evenings, there were formal dinners where she had to play the role of queen, sitting beside Lysander while the court watched and whispered. It should have been terrifying, and sometimes it was. But increasingly, Jessa found herself drawn into this world, fascinated by its rules and rituals. And she was becoming increasingly aware of Lysander himself, the way he commanded a room without raising his voice. The rare moments when his cold facade cracked to reveal something warmer underneath. The protective way his hand always found the small of her back in public. It was during one of these dinners, a week into her stay, that everything changed. A vampire Jessa didn't recognize approached the high table, bowing low. My king, I bring a message from the Moroi leader, Lord Corvus. The room went silent. Lysander's expression didn't change, but Jessa felt the temperature drop. Speak. Lord Corvus requests a meeting. He wishes to discuss terms. Lysander's voice was soft, dangerous. What terms could he possibly offer that would interest me? He says he will cease hostilities if you agree to step down. Allow a new king to take the throne. One who will restore the old ways. Gasps rippled through the assembled vampires. Jessa's heart lurched. They wanted Lysander to abdicate, to give up everything he'd built? Tell Corvus, Lysander said, each word precise, that he can meet me at dawn in the old cathedral ruins above ground. We'll settle this the traditional way. The messenger bowed and left. Jessa leaned close to Lysander. What's the traditional way? Single combat. His jaw was tight, to the death. Her blood went cold. You can't, it could be a trap. It probably is. He looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. But I can't refuse. To do so would make me look weak, and weakness will only embolden the Moroi further. That night Jessa couldn't sleep. She paced her chambers, her mind racing with possibilities, all of them ending with Lysander destroyed. Finally, unable to stand it anymore, she slipped out into the corridor. The guards looked uncertain when she insisted on seeing the king, but they didn't stop her. She found her way to Lysander's chambers and knocked before she could lose her nerve. He opened the door in just trousers and a loose shirt, his white hair unbound and falling past his shoulders. For a moment, Jessa forgot how to speak. He was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, all clean lines and predatory grace. Jessa. He said her first name for the first time, and something in her chest fluttered. What's wrong? Don't go. The words burst out. Tomorrow. Don't meet Corvus. There has to be another way. Lysander's expression softened. He stepped aside, gesturing her in. Come, sit. She entered, hyper-aware that she was alone with him in his private space in the middle of the night. He poured her wine and settled into the chair across from her. I have to go, he said gently. You know that. I know you think you do. But you're the king. Can't you just order them to stop? Execute the traitors? I could. But that would make me a tyrant, exactly what they accuse me of being. He sighed. A king's power comes from his people's faith in him. If I rule through fear alone, I'm no better than the monsters we claim to have evolved beyond. So you'll risk your life instead? Jessa's voice rose. That's insane. It's leadership. He leaned forward, his silver eyes intense. And I've survived 800 years by being very, very good at not dying. But what if she couldn't finish the sentence? The thought of him destroyed, gone, was suddenly unbearable, which made no sense. She'd known him for barely a week, Jessa. Lysander reached out, his cool fingers brushing her hand. Why does this upset you so much? She should have pulled away. Should have remembered that this was all pretend, that she was human and he was a vampire, that they existed in completely different worlds. But she didn't, because she heard herself whisper, I don't want you to die. The air between them seemed to thicken. Lysander's thumb traced small circles on her wrist, and even though his touch was cold, it sent heat racing through her veins. I won't, he said quietly. I promise you, I will come back. You can't promise that. I can and I do. He stood, pulling her up with him, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. I have something to come back for now, someone worth surviving for. Her heart stuttered. Lysander, I know this isn't real. The mating, the bond, I know it's pretend. His hand came up to cup her face, infinitely gentle. But somewhere in the past week it stopped feeling like a lie. At least for me. Jessa couldn't breathe. She should step back, put distance between them, remember all the reasons this was impossible. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch. This is crazy, she whispered. Yes, his smile was sad and beautiful. But I've lived for centuries and I've never felt anything like this. Like you see me, not just the king or the monster, but the man beneath. You're not a monster. I've done monstrous things. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. I've killed, Jessa. Fed on humans, even if I no longer do. I've lived through wars and plagues and horrors you can't imagine. I'm a creature of darkness and blood. And you're also the man who risks his life to protect a stranger. Who fights for peace when war would be easier. Who carries the weight of his people's survival on his shoulders and refuses to break. She placed her hand over his, keeping it against her face. I see all of you, Lysander. And I'm not afraid. Something cracked in his expression, and then he was kissing her. His lips were cool but soft, and the kiss was gentle, careful, like he was afraid she might shatter. Jessa made a soft sound and pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt. He pulled back, breathing hard despite not needing air. I shouldn't have done that. I'm glad you did. She was trembling, her heart racing. I'm glad. They stood there, foreheads touching, and Jessa felt the world shift around them. This was real. Whatever was happening between them, it was real and terrifying and wonderful. Come back to me, she said. Tomorrow. Promise me you'll come back. I swear it. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Jessa felt herself falling into something she didn't have a name for. Something that felt like destiny. When she finally returned to her chambers, dawn was approaching. She lay in bed, her fingers touching her lips, and wondered how her entire world had changed in the span of a single week. The next evening, as the artificial sun set over the underground realm, Jessa stood in the throne room surrounded by the entire court. Lysander was preparing to leave, armed with a sword that looked like it had been forged in another age. Seraphina stood beside Jessa, her expression worried. The king is skilled, she murmured. But Corvus is ancient and cunning. This will not be an easy fight. Jessa's hands were clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. When Lysander approached, the court bowed, but his eyes were only for her. Wait for me, he said softly. Always. The word left her before she could think about what it meant. He smiled, brief and bright, then turned and strode from the throne room. Jessa wanted to run after him, to beg him not to go, but she forced herself to stand still, to have faith. The hours that followed were agony. Jessa paced the throne room while the court whispered among themselves. Some looked worried. Others seemed almost eager, like they were hoping for a new king. How long does a challenge usually take? Jessa asked Seraphina. It depends. Sometimes minutes, sometimes hours. The vampire's crimson eyes were distant. I've known Lysander for 200 years. He's the finest warrior I've ever seen. But even the finest can fall. Jessa refused to accept that. She couldn't. When the doors finally opened, every head turned. Lysander walked in, his clothes torn and stained with blood, both red and black, she noted. He was limping slightly, and there was a wound on his shoulder that was healing slowly. But he was alive. He was alive and whole and walking toward her with those silver eyes blazing. Jessa didn't think. She ran to him, propriety and pretense forgotten. He caught her, his arms coming around her, and she buried her face in his chest. You're bleeding, she said, her voice muffled. I'm fine. Corvus won't trouble us again. His voice was rough, exhausted. It's over. She pulled back enough to look at him. Is he dead? As are the 3 vampires he brought with him, despite the terms of single combat. Lysander's expression was grim. It was a trap, as we expected. But I was prepared. The court erupted in cheers, but Jessa barely heard them. All she could focus on was the man in front of her, solid and real and alive. Never do that to me again, she whispered. I'll try. He touched her face gently. But Jessa, there's something you need to know. When I killed Corvus, I found letters on him. Communications with human extremists who know about our kind. They're planning to expose us, start a war. Her blood went cold. When? Soon. Within days. His jaw tightened, which means I need to act fast. Root out the conspiracy on both sides before it's too late, then let me help. Jessa straightened her spine. I'm a journalist. I know how to investigate, how to find sources, how to piece together a story. Use me. Lysander looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded. Very well, but we do this together, no taking risks without me. Same goes for you. His smile was tired but genuine, agreed. The next week was a blur of activity. Jessa worked alongside Lysander, using her human contacts to track down the extremists, while he dealt with vampire traders. They worked late into the artificial nights, poring over evidence, making calls, connecting dots. And somewhere in the midst of all that, they fell deeper. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was quiet moments, Lysander's hand on her shoulder when she was tired, the way she brought him wine when he was stressed. Conversations that lasted until dawn about everything and nothing. They talked about her life before, his centuries of existence, dreams and fears and hopes. I never thought I'd care for someone again, Lysander admitted one night as they sat in his study, maps spread before them. After so long it seemed impossible. And then you literally crashed into my life. Technically, you crashed into mine. Jessa was curled in a chair beside his desk, her feet tucked under her. But I'm glad you did, are you? He looked at her seriously. I've disrupted your entire life. Trapped you in a world you never asked to be part of. You saved my life, and yes, at first I was terrified and angry. But now, she paused, searching for words. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else, with anyone else. He crossed to her, kneeling so they were eye level. When this is over, when you're safe to return to your world, I'll let you go if that's what you want. I won't trap you here. And if I don't want to go? Something fierce and hopeful flared in his eyes. Then I would spend every day proving myself worthy of you. Making sure you never regretted choosing this life, choosing me. Jessa reached out, threading her fingers through his white hair. You already are worthy. You're the best man I've ever known, vampire or otherwise. He kissed her then, and it felt like coming home. Like finding something she hadn't known she was missing. They were so lost in each other that they almost didn't hear the alarm bells. Lysander pulled back, his expression sharpening. That's the perimeter warning. Someone's breached the court. They raced through the corridors, guards falling in around them. When they reached the throne room, chaos greeted them. A group of vampires Jessa didn't recognize stood in the center, surrounded by Lysander's guards. And at their head stood a woman who looked almost human, color in her cheeks, warmth in her eyes except for the fangs visible when she smiled. Hello, cousin, she said to Lysander. Did you miss me? Lysander's entire body had gone rigid. Victoria, you're supposed to be in the Eastern Court. It was, until I heard the most interesting rumor that you'd finally taken a mate. Victoria's gaze slid to Jessa, assessing and cold. A human mate, no less. How very progressive of you. What do you want? To meet this woman who's captured the great Lysander Draven's heart, of course. Victoria glided forward, her movements serpentine. Tell me, little human, do you know what you've gotten yourself into? Jessa lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. I know exactly what I've gotten into, and I'm not afraid of you. Oh, you should be. Victoria's smile was all teeth. Because if you're truly Lysander's mate, that makes you a target for every vampire who wants to hurt him. And there are so very many of us. Lysander stepped between them, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. Touch her, threaten her, even think about harming her, and I will end you, cousin or not. There's the monster I remember. Victoria laughed. Good, I was beginning to think you'd gone soft. She turned to her companions. Come, we've delivered our message. What message? Jessa demanded. Victoria paused at the threshold. That the Eastern Court won't recognize a human queen. That if Lysander insists on this farce, they'll consider it an act of war. You have until the next full moon to renounce her. Otherwise, she shrugged elegantly. Well, the last war between courts lasted a century and killed thousands. I'd hate to see that happen again. Then she was gone, leaving a terrible silence in her wake. Jessa felt cold despite the warmth of the underground realm. She's serious, isn't she? Yes. Lysander's hands were fists at his sides. Victoria doesn't bluff. Then we fix this. We tell them the truth, that we're not really mates, that this was just for my protection. No. His voice was absolute. That won't stop them. If anything, it'll make things worse. They'll see you as a weakness regardless. So what do we do? Lysander turned to her, and in his eyes she saw centuries of battle, of survival, of refusing to break. We fight. We find allies among the other courts. We prove that human and vampire can coexist. And we do it together. Together, Jessa echoed and took his hand. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Lysander sent emissaries to the other courts, western, southern and northern, seeking their support. Jessa worked the human angle, quietly reaching out to government contacts, preparing them for possible exposure of the vampire world while emphasizing the Noctis Court's peaceful intentions. And every night she and Lysander grew closer. They stopped pretending it was just an act, stopped dancing around what was becoming increasingly obvious, that somewhere between the terror and the politics and the danger, they'd fallen in love. It was Jessa who said it first. They were in the gardens, the night blooming flowers heavy with perfume, when she turned to him and said, "I love you." Lysander went very still. "Jessa, I know it's fast. I know we're from different worlds. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this shouldn't work." She took his hands, her fingers warm against his cold ones. "But I love you anyway, and I'm not going to apologize for it." He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "I've loved you since the moment you demanded I go to a hospital despite being terrified, since you looked at a vampire and saw a person worth saving." His voice was rough with emotion. "I love you, Jessa Graves. With everything I am and everything I've been. You are my heart, my hope, my reason for fighting." They kissed under the eternal night of the underground realm, and Jessa felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. This was where she belonged. With him. The responses from the other courts came back over the following days. The Western Court pledged support. Their leader was an old friend of Lysander's and respected his vision. The Southern Court was neutral but sympathetic. The Northern Court sided with the East, calling Lysander's choice an abomination. "So it's war," Jessa said quietly, reading the Northern Court's message. "Not yet." Lysander was at his desk, writing furiously. "There's still a chance. The Council of Kings meets once every decade to settle disputes. It's not scheduled for another 3 years, but I can call an emergency session. Force them to hear our case. Will they listen? They'll have to. By vampire law, the Council's decision is absolute." He looked up at her. "But Jessa, you'll have to speak. Testify before them about humans, about our capacity for coexistence. Can you do that?" She thought about everything she'd learned, everything she'd seen. The vampires who'd accepted her, treated her with respect. The careful balance Lysander had built. The potential for a future where both species thrived. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." The Council of Kings convened in neutral territory, a hidden cathedral deep in the mountains. Jessa traveled with Lysander and a small guard, her heart hammering as they entered the vast echoing space. 4 thrones sat in a semicircle, and on them sat the rulers of the 4 great courts. Lysander took his place among them, but gestured for Jessa to stand beside him rather than behind, a statement of equality that made several of the other kings frown. "This council is called to order," said the Western King, an ancient vampire named Aldrich. "Lysander of the Noctis Court has brought a petition regarding his choice of mate. Let him speak." Lysander stood, and his voice carried through the cathedral. "My lords, I stand before you having chosen a human as my mate. I know this is unprecedented in recent centuries, but I submit that it is not wrong. Jessa Graves is intelligent, compassionate, and strong. She has proven herself worthy of respect not through power but through character. And more than that, she represents the future I envision for our people, one where we don't hide in shadows and feed fear, but walk alongside humans as equals." Equals. The Eastern King, a cruel-looking vampire Jessa recognized from portraits as Victoria's father, Casimir, laughed harshly. "They are cattle, food. To suggest otherwise is to deny our very nature. Our nature is what we make it," Lysander shot back. "We have the power to choose who we are. I choose peace, progress, coexistence. And if the humans reject that choice, if they hunt us, destroy us, then we defend ourselves. But we don't strike first. We don't become the monsters they fear." Lysander's gaze swept the assembly. "I've lived for 8 centuries. I've seen what endless war accomplishes, nothing but death and suffering on both sides. I'm tired of it, and I believe we can do better." There was a long silence. Then Aldrich spoke. "The human may address the council." Jessa's throat went dry, but she stepped forward. "My lords, a month ago I didn't know vampires existed. I was a journalist living a normal life. Then I witnessed an attack and Lysander saved me. He could have killed me, erased my memory, done any number of things to protect your secret. Instead, he brought me here, protected me, and in doing so showed me that vampires aren't the monsters human legends claim." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I've lived among you now. I've seen your culture, your laws, your capacity for mercy and justice. Yes, you need blood to survive. But you're not mindless predators. You're people with families and hopes and fears just like humans. And I believe that if humans knew the truth, if they met you as I have, they would see that too." "And if they don't," Casimir demanded, "if they react with fear and violence, then that's on them. But you can't let the possibility of human fear turn you into the very things they're afraid of. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Jessa looked at each king in turn. Lysander is offering you a chance at real peace, a future where both our species can thrive. All you have to do is be brave enough to take it. Another silence, longer this time. Then the northern king, a grim vampire named Theron, spoke. The girl speaks well, but words are cheap. How do we know this isn't some elaborate deception, that she won't expose us the moment she's free? Because I love him, Jessa said simply. Because I've seen what he's built and I want to help him protect it, not destroy it. Casimir's lip curled. Love. A human's love is fleeting, meaningless, is it? Lysander's voice was quiet but intense. You've ruled for 1,000 years, Casimir. Have you ever loved anything? Or has it all been power and politics and endless scheming? He looked at the other kings. I was empty. For centuries I was empty, going through the motions of ruling, of existing without feeling truly alive. Jessa changed that. She gave me hope again. Purpose beyond simple survival. That's not meaningless, that's everything. Aldrich leaned forward. If we grant this petition, acknowledge your human mate, you understand what you're asking? The other courts will have to accept her. Bow to her. Treat her as a queen. I understand. And you're willing to stake your crown on this? If the council rejects your petition, you'll have to choose the throne or the woman. Jessa's heart stopped. She looked at Lysander, and in his silver eyes she saw the truth. He would choose her. He would give up everything he'd built, the kingdom he'd ruled for 3 centuries, all of it for her. Wait, she said. No, Lysander, you can't. It won't come to that. His hand found hers, squeezing gently. Have faith. The kings withdrew to deliberate. The wait was agony. Jessa paced the cathedral, her mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. What if they said no? What if Lysander lost his crown? What if they're returning? One of the guards murmured. The kings took their seats again. Aldrich spoke, his ancient face grave. We have reached a decision. By vote of 3 to 1, the council recognizes Jessa Graves as Lysander Draven's mate and rightful queen of the Noctis Court. Jessa's knees nearly buckled with relief. Lysander's arm came around her waist, steadying her. However, Aldrich continued, this recognition comes with conditions. The Noctis Court will serve as a test case for human-vampire relations. If within 1 year's time, you have successfully integrated your court with the human world without catastrophic exposure or violence, the other courts will follow your example. If you fail, he paused significantly. The council will intervene and your experiment will end. I accept those terms. Lysander said without hesitation. Casimir rose from his throne, his expression venomous. This is a mistake. Mark my words, Draven, your human will be your downfall. Then I fall gladly, Lysander replied. Thank you, my lords. They left the cathedral as the sun was rising, and for the first time, Jessa understood the danger in a visceral way. Lysander couldn't be in direct sunlight. They hurried to the waiting car, and she saw him wince as a shaft of light caught his arm, leaving a red mark that took minutes to heal. That's what it does to you? She asked quietly as they drove back toward the underground realm. Yes, our weakness and our curse. He looked at the fading mark. A few seconds is painful but manageable. Longer exposure would kill me. Jessa took his hand, pressing a kiss to the healed skin. Then I'll make sure you never have to face the sun alone. Back at the Noctis Court, they were greeted with celebration. News of the council's decision had spread and the court was jubilant. Serafina embraced Jessa carefully but warmly. You did it, she said. You've given us hope. Over the next months, Lysander and Jessa worked tirelessly to fulfill the council's conditions. They reached out to select human leaders, revealing the existence of vampires in carefully controlled meetings. They established protocols for blood donation, ensuring vampires could feed without hunting. They created laws governing human-vampire interactions. It wasn't easy. There were humans who reacted with fear and hatred. There were vampires who resisted change. But slowly, carefully, they built bridges. And through it all, Jessa and Lysander's bond deepened. She learned the intricacies of vampire politics, became a true queen to his people. He learned to exist in the human world again, to see it through her eyes. 6 months into their year-long trial, Lysander took Jessa to the surface world, to a private estate he owned in the countryside. They stood on a balcony as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. I have something for you, he said, pulling out a small box. Inside was a ring, silver and diamond, shaped like 2 hands clasping. In my time this was called a feed ring, a symbol of faith and loyalty between partners. He took it from the box, kneeling before her. Jessa Graves, I know we've already told the world you're my mate, but I want to ask you properly, will you marry me? Not for politics or protection, but because I love you more than I thought possible. Because you are my light in the darkness, my hope, my heart. Tears streamed down Jessa's face. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her as the sun disappeared below the horizon, leaving them in the soft embrace of twilight. Their wedding took place on the 1-year anniversary of the council's decision, and it was unlike anything either world had seen before. Vampires and humans gathered together in the underground cathedral, bearing witness as Jessa and Lysander pledged their lives to each other. "I never believed in fate," Lysander said, holding her hands in his. "In 800 years I never thought I'd find someone who made eternity seem too short. But then you crashed into my life literally and everything changed. You are my miracle, Jessa. My impossible, wonderful miracle." "I never believed in monsters," Jessa replied, her voice thick with emotion. "And then I met you and realized that the real monsters are those who choose cruelty over kindness, fear over hope. You chose to be good, Lysander. Every day, for centuries, you chose to be better. And I'm honored to spend my life however long I have standing beside you." There was a moment of silence, then Lysander spoke again, his voice soft enough that only she could hear. "There is a way for you to have more than a human lifetime, if you wanted it." Jessa's breath caught. "You mean, becoming one of us? It's a choice I would never force on you. But if you wanted eternity, I could give it to you." His silver eyes searched hers. "Though I'll love you just as fiercely whether you have 50 years or 5,000. She thought about immortality, about watching everyone she knew grow old and die, about the hunger for blood and the weakness to sunlight. But she also thought about forever with the man she loved, about the work they'd started together, about the future they could build. "Ask me again in a year," she said. "Let me live as human a while longer. But Lysander, I think eventually, yes, I want forever with you." His smile was brilliant, joy lighting his features in a way she'd never seen before. "Then forever you shall have." The year passed in a blur of happiness. The experiment was deemed a success, humans and vampires coexisting peacefully in the Noctis Court, with other courts beginning to implement similar programs. The Moroi extremists had been rooted out, the conspiracy with human extremists dismantled. Jessa continued her work as a journalist, but now she wrote about vampire culture, educating humans and breaking down fear with understanding. Lysander continued ruling, but with Jessa beside him the weight felt lighter, and when the year was up, when Jessa was ready, Lysander took her to their private chambers and gave her the choice one final time. "Are you certain? Once it's done, there's no going back." "I'm certain," she said. "I love you. I love this life we've built, and I want to see where we go from here." The transformation was painful but brief, and when Jessa woke 3 days later, the world had changed. Colors were sharper, sounds clearer, and she was desperately hungry. Lysander was there, guiding her through the first feeding from donated blood, teaching her control. And when she finally looked in a mirror and saw her own reflection, pale skin, darker hair, eyes that now held a hint of crimson, she didn't feel lost. She felt found. Lysander asked, his arm around her waist. "Like I'm home," she said, finally completely home. They stood together, Vampire King and his Vampire Queen, looking out over the realm they'd built. There would be challenges ahead, there always were. But they would face them together, through however many centuries fate granted them. And in the throne room below, when Jessa walked in beside Lysander for the first time as one of them, the entire court bowed. Not because they'd been ordered to, not out of political necessity, but out of genuine respect and love for the woman who'd changed everything. Lysander looked at her, a question in his eyes. Should he tell them the story of how they met? How she'd been human once, how their bond had started as protection and grown into something real? But Jessa just smiled and shook her head. Some truths didn't need telling. The court bowed to her as his wife, as their queen, and that was all that mattered. The rest, the fear and danger and impossible odds they'd overcome, that was their story alone. Years turned to decades, decades to centuries. The world above changed, evolved, and gradually learned to accept the existence of vampires. The Noctis Court became a symbol of hope, proof that different species could coexist in peace. And through it all, Lysander and Jessa ruled together. They had their fights, passionate creatures both, in their triumphs. They watched the world transform, welcomed new vampires into their court, built alliances that lasted generations. On their 100th wedding anniversary, they returned to the place where it had all begun, that street corner where Lysander's car had crashed, where he'd first seen the human woman who would change his life. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, holding her hand as they stood in the shadows. "Giving up your humanity? Your chance at a normal life?" Jessa looked at him, this man she'd loved for a century, who still made her heart race with a glance. "Not for a single moment. You are my normal, Lysander. This life with you is everything I ever wanted and more than I dared dream." He pulled her close, kissing her with 100 years of love and devotion. "Then I am the luckiest creature in existence, to have crashed into you that night." to have been given the gift of your heart. We're both lucky, she said, smiling against his lips. And we have eternity to keep being grateful for it. They walked back to their realm hand in hand, king and queen, partners in every sense of the word. The court would be waiting, full of vampires who'd found hope in their story. But for now, in this moment, it was just the two of them, Lysander Draven and Jessa Graves, who'd defied every odd, broken every rule, and built a love that would last forever. And in the throne room, when they returned, the whole court would bow, not out of duty or tradition, but out of love for the couple who'd taught them all that sometimes the most impossible things are the most worth fighting for. The end of their story was also a beginning of a new age, a new understanding, a new world, and they would face it together, just as they always had, just as they always would forever.